Hello, hello. Welcome to a new episode of Policy War. I am your host, Russell. On this podcast, we debate political issues in the U.S. from three different perspectives. I give the progressive perspective, and we have two other hosts here.
I'm Matthew. I give a libertarian perspective, more middle of the road.
I'm Jordan, and I try to give a conservative perspective.
All right. And today, our topic is the upcoming eviction crisis that's going to be faced by the United States. Now, some of you may have never heard of eviction before. An eviction is basically when a landlord expels you out of a property, kicks you out of a property because you're not making rental payments. Evictions are very common in the U.S. We had an average. This was a report by the Eviction Lab at Princeton University that estimated from 2000 to 2016, we had an average of 3.6 million evictions annually. That is some of the highest in the world. And coronavirus is obviously exaggerating that problem. At the start of the pandemic, about 4 months before July, Congress enacted a federal moratorium on evictions, which basically stopped renters from being able to evict tenants. Now, the rental payments, the tenants will still have to eventually pay, or else they'll get evicted after the moratorium is done. But until August 31st, the tenants do not have to make any rental payments. Now, there's a separate one for just Moody's, or pretty much Federal Main Mac, which is one of the biggest housing agencies in the U.S., and the Federal Housing Administration basically extended the moratorium, which was supposed to end on August 25th, to August 31st for 2 million American residents. So really the official federal ending of all moratoriums is pretty much going to be on August 31st. So the implications of this are far-reaching, especially during a national pandemic. You would have guessed it. Many people cannot pay their rental payments. Unemployment is at a very high rate, over 10% in August, and there aren't many signs of it getting better. The United States, again, has the most coronavirus cases in the world, and this pandemic is really exacerbating all the economic inequality and problems the U.S. had. So Trump has stated that he is for a moratorium extension, but in recent executive orders he signed, there has not been any real moratorium extension on rental payments. So on August 31st, pretty much every resident is going to have to fend for themselves unless states and cities decide to input their own moratoriums, which have been done. Los Angeles input a moratorium that lasts until September 31st. Matthew has some statistics about Colorado's handling of the issue, but I do want to discuss this first problem is, should this be a decentralized issue, or should the federal government just establish a moratorium that extends it for a longer time, or should just be left to states and cities to handle landlords themselves?
My thoughts are that it should be based upon the region, because you're going to have hot spots and you have spots that haven't even been hit yet. And there's no point in extending that moratorium or telling them how to self-govern if it is unnecessary. Now, if the states would like to relinquish that right to the federal government, then they may, but I think that's more of a regional thing, because you'll actually see later on when I make my case that the Midwest and South seem to be doing all right. It's mainly the East Coast and heavily populated or densely populated areas that are suffering.
So I also agree that it should be decentralized. I do think that it's a lot more justified at first to have it directly from the federal government, because it's an emergency, and I think that the only role that the federal government should have when it comes to huge actions, obviously during emergencies, but money doesn't grow on trees. Eventually, we're going to have to expanding the moratoriums does get problematic. So obviously, areas that don't need to don't. Make sure that either state or local level that's handled at rather than the federal. So I agree with Matthew on that.
Why would you believe in possibly extending it to a federal level, Russ?
Well, I saw this on Washington Post's article, which was a report done by the COVID-19 Eviction Defense Project, a Colorado-based community group, where it said, quote, of the 110 million Americans living in rental households, 20% are at risk for 30th, according to analysis by the COVID-19 Eviction Defense Project. According to a Census Bureau survey, 24 million people say they have little to no chance of being able to pay August rent. So with a problem that affects the entire nation like this, it's kind of inconsistent to say it should go state by state. That just allows multiple governors to have multiple different moratoriums, a lot of confusion when really this is a national issue. It's like saying people need health care, everybody in this nation needs health care, but it should be a state by state basis. People need shelter, people need houses, but instead of the federal government doing it on a nationwide basis, let's just do it on a state by state basis. And I don't get that when it's a problem that affects the entire nation. What is the federal government there for, if not for that?
So, in response to that, I would say that we're unique in the sense that, of course, we're a laboratory. We're 50 different laboratories essentially. So we get to experiment with our own policies. And while it is an issue that is affecting the country as a whole, it's affecting different areas in different ways. And you have different demographics throughout the countries and different regions and different population densities. So it's hard to make a blanket statement. The federal government would exist to help with national things, be it national defense or it depends on how far you're looking to. I guess you have a different definition than myself whenever it comes to the reach of federal government. Healthcare is, technically not a right, but the people of a state can come together and decide what plans work for them. You see that difference with, a state like Indiana versus a state like California with procedures that may be covered or the type of coverage it's there. So it's one of those things where, like the crisis going on, you may have higher numbers that are happening in New York City or Los Angeles, where it would dictate that the mayor creates a moratorium for rent. But why should that be blanket over everybody else? Because it's not going to apply the same way.
It's blanket because, yes, we're 50 different laboratories, but there's one obvious solution to the problem, which is to extend moratoriums. So, if we have an obvious solution to the issue of millions of people becoming homeless, potentially over 20 million people becoming homeless in a matter of months, then obviously the federal government should take some steps towards that. Homeless shelters can't handle the coronavirus pandemic. They're almost as bad as nursing homes. There's no way we can afford an increase in homelessness during these times. But I'm interested in what everyone has to say.
As a conservative, we usually don't like if we have to, we usually don't like to use the government as a solution for again, most things except for military and emergency and police and stuff like that. But as far as I think fundamentally that the main issue we're talking about is homelessness. Yes, because that's what this creates. There are a lot of conservative solutions that aren't exactly government related, but some of them are, but they're not calling for absolute government control in that sense. And it also has to do with the economy, such as, I've said these solutions before, stuff like I think getting rid of the minimum wage. This is just economic, and this would contribute to getting people out of homelessness. So getting rid of the minimum wage, repealing the multitude of federal welfare programs that incentivize families breaking up, because the vast majority of homelessness is for single parent households. I do think that if they're government stuff, the local government should be help funding the homeless shelters, even though they might not be safe right now. They do need more funding. You can't just get rid of them. They do need more funding to be able to enact new safety and COVID protocols into place. And on top of that, mental health facilities and drug rehab facilities. And the reason why these specifically are a good idea to put towards the government is because they lower crime rather than just extending moratoriums. And those are just some practical solutions that conservatives would prefer instead of a government extending the moratorium. But on top of that, it's just going to contribute to inflation. Also, by not letting the rent be paid, the landlords have to suffer for that. So, and then if you try to pay them off, then the next person in the chain is going to have to suffer for that as well. So, I don't like the money grows on trees assumption.
We do need to talk about the landlords suffering, but they're also during this time, housing prices are at the lowest they've been in a while, since many people cannot obviously afford a house at this moment. So there was some information about housing prices are the housing market being very strong in this month and actually having them kind of spike by about 60% in states
Mhm.
like Colorado. And I do believe that landlords can easily make up the temporary lack of rental payments. It's there's still tenants are still required to pay it under the federal regulations. It just builds up. Like some people, like say if your rent's $700, which is amazing, that doesn't exist, and you have it hold for like 4 months, it turns to $2,800, and then at the end of this moratorium, people will be forced to pay out $2,800
Yeah.
along with next month's rent payment. However, that landlord wants to carry that out. But that needs to be a conversation between landlord and tenant. But one thing I know about most landlords, sorry to any landlords hearing this podcast, is that they're kind of greedy. They really want their money now, and I think landlords are some of the richest people in this nation. So I don't think they need to be worried about right now. Who needs to be worried about are the people who are living paycheck to paycheck. Who needs to be worried about are people who are going to become homeless during a pandemic. I think it's just obvious what our main concern is here. 20 million Americans potentially coming homeless, or thousands of landlords losing a couple $1,000s. Like, where's the real priority here?
Well, I'm for treating people equally under the law. Obviously, the people who are about to become homeless are the focus of the problem, but skewing the law against landlords, I don't think that's the way to do it.
You gotta realize laws are meant to create equity in society. Like,
No.
yes,
That's
well, we have a completely different philosophy then.
yeah. Well, that's my position. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yes, because corporate taxes, proportional income tax, which taxes those who make more money than average, who are rich, is not equal, Jordan. I'm sorry to tell you this. It's not equal. It's not fair, but it's meant to create equitable distribution amongst society. So I guess, are you saying you're against corporate taxes also? Do you think those should be abolished because it's unfairly taxing those
I mean,
who have the
okay.
most money in society? Is that also bad?
So, as far as because a lot of my arguments are just philosophical, in capitalism, unlike other systems of government, when the rich succeed, it is not at the expense of everyone else. People can latch on to the people who succeed and be benefited with their success. Your success is not mutually exclusive to your own benefit, in other words. So, as far as like that does play a role in taxes. I don't really know specifics on should there be like those taxes at all, but I'm definitely not for increasing them at the level they are right now.
So before we get too far down another rabbit hole and get into an economic argument, I mean, I know
Yeah.
yeah,
Thanks for
we're
keeping us
gonna
on track.
yeah we're gonna go ahead. I'm gonna go ahead and present some cases or some articles, or a highlight of some articles, kind of giving a snapshot of the broader situation here. So there's a CNBC article this past week by Diana Olick that highlights that home sales are up 36.3% compared to last month. So that's an increase right there. There's a 7.2% increase in houses alone in the house prices from July 2019 to July 2020. And that's mainly in the South and the Midwest. So what we see here is people are demanding houses and people are purchasing houses during this time. Now, it's further kind of expanded upon in an article by Florida Daily dated on August 23rd that states that for Florida alone, there's an 11.7% increase in sales, with a 23.2% increase in new pending sales just in June alone. So we see that while there was a lull maybe early on, how the housing market itself is kicking back up. And the main focus or the main reasoning behind that, people believe, is the relief, the moratorium on mortgage payments, which will end by the government soon, but may be extended by private firms on their own behalf, and a decrease in the interest rate from 3.77% to 3.02%. So with the decrease in the interest rate, investing is prioritized over saving. Now I'm going to kind of, end this out with one more article here by the Colorado Sun, dated this past week, that there's a 30% increase in the homeless, estimated 30% increase in the homeless population due to the pandemic. but it's kind of interesting because on June 13th, the protection from Colorado ended. And of course, this past 31st, the August moratorium is about to end. However, they have data that suggests that 93.9% of people, according to the Colorado Apartment Association, which is a 60% sample of the owners in Colorado, so 93.9% of that sample paid their rent for July already, or didn't have trouble paying their rent for July. So we can already see a substantial amount of people can pay that. Now, one of the dangerous things is that eviction is only down 1/3 to 1/3 of the normal rate that it is for this past year during this time. So we can see evictions are incredibly low, which is unnatural. Now, it's a good thing that the people aren't homeless, but you figure people are stuck in those contracts. The landlords are likely stuck in that situation because they may not be able to evict individuals as often as they would, which means they're taking a loss. Now, business perspective for Colorado, the senior vice president of government affairs for the apartment association for the Denver metropolitan area mentioned that it's very unlikely that you're going to see this mass eviction. Okay. He said that some sources are saying up to 450,000 will be evicted, but that's false because you got to remember there's a market. If you have an empty building, you're losing money as a landlord. And so there's actually been a decrease up to $30 in rent in some of these locations because these landlords have to work with their tenants. You can't just kick them out. It's not just like they're going to magically see new people in there. So that's kind of one of those things. Now, I will mention, kind of closing it out, is within that Colorado Sun article, they did take a perspective from the University of Colorado Director of Business Research at the Leeds Research School of Business, Brian Lewandowski. And he essentially said that the economy will recover, but it's going to be a K-shaped curve. You're going to have winners and losers. So your wealthy individuals are going to likely benefit from this pandemic, whereas you're going to have people who are in the lower socioeconomic status that will be at a disadvantage. So essentially, kind of closing up my summary there, we're going to see that the middle class and those who can afford to purchase houses are going to have a decent time throughout the pandemic. They'll likely benefit with their mortgage rates in the long term, whereas those that have trouble making those payments may be worse off, though it's likely not as many people as we think.
What I'm hearing is the rich get richer and the housing market's doing all right. I mean, I don't hear much about the average person in that argument. Just recently, let me say this. Jeff Bezos owns more than 10 homes across the world. Recently, he hit a milestone. He's worth more than $200 billion. $200 billion. Elon Musk, just recently, in the last quarter, made $8 billion. This is during a national recession. Obviously, I would wonder who the people buying those houses are, because it's most likely upper middle class and the wealthy elite of American society. I don't think the majority of people have the capital to buy a house right now or to take rent. So, and also the fact that this study you did is based on Colorado shows why your laboratories of democracy argument doesn't really work. In this study, 93.9% of people can pay their rent. But in the study I just showed you, which showed that 20 million people were at risk of eviction across the United States, that's obviously not just Colorado, which is one of the smallest states in the union. That goes to California, Texas, Washington, Illinois. Colorado's such a minute sample size for that. I mean, the laboratory democracy argument, if we just looked at Colorado, then you may even say there's no problem, but still you got to look at the rest of the country and see, oh, wait, there's still 49 other states that need to be helped here.
So my point, first off, what is considered at risk for eviction? Okay. What is that definition? How is that defined? Because as I've stated before, does it take into account possible drops in rent? Because as I've stated within my case, there is a $30 drop in rent in some places. So that may be something where landlords can come to an agreement with tenants. So they will lose out a bit, but they'll still have that space occupied because, as I said before, they need that space occupied to make money. It's useless if it's not occupied. And second off, most of those stats about the increase in sales and houses over the past few months have to do with single family homes. But what I'm saying is the housing market is bouncing back.
But
It's a
this
decent.
debate, this it's not about the housing markets. It's about the well-being of the general American people. It's like how I always hear on places like Fox News, where they're like, the stock market's doing great. That means the economy's doing great. No, it doesn't. 82% of the stock market is owned by 10% of the American population. Guess who those 10% are? The richest people in the world. Warren Buffett, Jeff Bezos, owners of Walmart. It's not a good representation of how the average person is doing, and neither is this housing market. If rental prices go down $30, which is really insignificant when you consider it, and the fact that some houses being bought. Who are these houses being bought by? Let's be honest, it's still rich people. But Jordan, what do you think about the situation?
As far as so I will say that when the top 1% get 90% of the wealth, that I think that happens in virtually every society. I say that, yes, it's a problem, but I think that the solution to that is to allow for competition, but policy wise. And when it comes to housing markets, I do think that this is the same for really any kind of problem in politics. Companies should be allowed to do what they want so that people can cater to those companies to which they support for the decision that they made. Did they extend moratoriums? Oh, yes. And if I believe that that was a good thing, then I'll go to that company, or vice versa if you disagreed. I do think there is such thing as policy that actually prevents housing development, like a NIMBYism. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that term. There's also various building codes. So housing costs are out of control in urban areas because local governments do not allow development of additional residential units, usually under the guise of protecting the character of an area or some other nonsense. So we should make housing as affordable as possible, which means allowing developers to build more housing. So that's another issue, but it is important to say that there are still limiting factors to allowing for houses to be built. And this is the housing market. And again, this is for the greater good of the American people. That shouldn't exclude the housing market, because I said before, if the housing market succeeds, then everyone else is able to benefit off of that success. Now, of course, we're in a pandemic and disparities are increasing, but they're still increasing relatively to zero, but they're not increasing relatively to the rich. That's always the case.
I'm trying to understand what you mean by that, because income inequality has been increasing in America. Like, if you look at the Gini coefficient, and what Gini coefficient is basically a measurement of income inequality in countries around the world, compared to places like Europe and Asia. Japan has some of the lowest income inequality in the world. Germany has some of the lowest income inequality in the world. The United States has some of the highest income inequality in the world. So I'm wondering what you mean by disparities are increasing. Can you clarify that a little bit more?
So there's another example of this for gender equality or gender disparity. You ever heard of the studies done in Scandinavia? I'll just say this as a quick example. So what they did is they tried to have policies that strove towards gender equity. And what happened is that instead of men and women become more the same, their differences actually got more extreme. So I believe that every single time policies strive towards equity, it actually creates more inequity.
But there's plenty of examples that prove that wrong. The Equal Pay Act, signed under John F. Kennedy, obviously decreased disparities in pay amongst men and women, because it enforced income, not necessarily social differences. Fiscal measurements are very easy to equal distribution amongst people. Social laws are a completely different thing, but it's not really what we're talking about here. If you have an economic bill, just like the CARES Act that was passed, which gave $1,200 to most Americans, obviously that's going to decrease income inequality. So I don't see an example in America in which a bill, which was meant to basically, I feel like Robin Hood right now, take money from the rich and give to the poor, failed. It actually decreasing income inequality in the country. I don't know any example, and this housing is just another similar situation because most economic battles in this country are with the rich versus the poor, in all honesty. And I think the government should make the right choice in the majority of people who are poor, who cannot afford their rental payments, compared to the minority of landlords who have more than enough money to survive through this crisis. And if they lose a house or two to the property taxes, oh, woe is me. I still care more about those impoverished. So I guess it's a difference of real perspective here. But I mean,
So what's your, it seems like your perception is based on that of equality of, more of an equality of outcome approach, or at least a baseline approach, because you seem to want to have everybody having some sort of wealth and an automatic guaranteed housing. While, you know, everybody wants the best. Well, you
no,
seem to be wanting everybody to have some sort of apartment or some sort of access to that, you know, given the situations and taking away from the rich, you stated. So you
well,
seem to be striding for taking away. Now, I'm not going to make the argument that, you know, oh, they're the most successful 1%, they know everything. Though these individuals, the wealthy individuals are not people who are just Scrooge McDuck with hundreds of millions of dollars under their mattress at night. You know, they're reinvesting the money into other ventures, into other businesses, expanding, you know, that. They're not just purchasing copious amounts of land and just saying, oh, this is my vacation home. This is this home right here. You know, they're investing that 8 billion into other ventures as well.
well, I'll tackle the first thing you said first. No, I don't think it's feasible for everybody to have a home. Extending moratoriums is really a centrist thing to do. Like an extreme progressive thing to do would be to establish a federal housing authority and establish hundreds and thousands of homes across the U.S. for affordable housing for the impoverished. I'm not even arguing for that. All I'm arguing for is a temporary extension of moratoriums for landlords in which they have to take a small hit to rent payments. That's all I'm arguing. And there's still a high chance that people can pay that once unemployment decreases down below 10%, some of the highest it's ever been in American history, and people actually have income to pay for their jobs. I mean, and the point that you made of rich people putting money back into the economy, in many cases that's not true. Let's be honest here. If you're a billionaire, I would be shocked if you don't have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 homes. Let's be honest here. If you're a billionaire, I'd be shocked if you don't have 100 different jets and your
But
own private golf course and, and splurging out money on tons of drinks. You may argue that's good for the economy, but really it's only good for the people who can own jets, who can own houses. The rich are just helping the rich. Now, that's why the government really exists, in all honesty, is to protect those most vulnerable. And in this case, that is the impoverished.
Well, I mean, look at and just imagine like what this whole pandemic experience would have been like without Amazon. Like it's a very significant factor. Like this is just like a recent example. Like because of the success of Amazon, it has made all of our lives a lot easier. We would not have had very fast shipping of low prices that's available across the country, and that's just one example. Yes, it is true that rich people do have they get their own leisures that don't benefit anyone except for themselves, but that's not the only thing they do. Like if I were someone like that, I'm not trying to be moralistic. I still think it's like yes, you don't need that stuff. If there is a rich person that's not investing back into the economy, I'm not going to condemn them on a policy level, but more on a moral and social level. But if they're actually trying to steal from others, of course, that's an entirely different issue. But most rich people, because they want more money, they invest back into the economy, and that benefits others as well. Yeah.
so
Go ahead.
one thing I'll say to kind of add on top of it is, I guess instead of saying they have 4 or 5, 10 houses and saying it's bad that they own that, maybe look at it from a proportionality standpoint. Everybody's going to have a proportionality of their income that's deemed disposable. And whether you're born into that wealth or you create that wealth yourself, it's 9 times out of 10, it's not by holding a gun to someone else's head. You had some sort of venture, you created something happened there. Now there's people who may dodge taxes or people that may look for loopholes in the law, which is wrong in a sense, but you do have transactions going down to create that wealth, and they're putting a portion of their wealth back into this system to help for growth to also profit as well. So kind of like the argument I was making earlier, that not all of that money, whenever he makes $8 billion, not all of that money is going into, new houses or like his golf course or, this type of stuff. And in a sense, by founding that company and taking those risks, he's a founder of the company. He deserves it. I mean, it depends on your view of government. Your view of government seems to be one of equality, whereas, my view of government would be that of, I guess, upholding boundaries and kind of keeping, a people together, more of like just creating a nation and protecting rights or your individual rights. And so that will differ between yourself and myself and Jordan, but it's still going to be, one of those arguments of values versus an actual on paper.
Yeah, this definitely has gotten more philosophical and abstract than I predicted it to about our different views on
That'd be a good idea
values.
for a future episode, maybe next week or something, going over what are the values of government? What viewpoints do we come from?
Yes, possibly, but I do want to end it on this note, or else it's going to be Greek philosophers in the next episode. So I guess thanks for listening. I hope everybody listening has their own view of government they established, and I hope hopefully this helps people accumulate their own views, which is what it's meant to do. It's not meant to be biased; it's meant to come from 3 different perspectives, and I think we really got a good sense of what everybody thought the value of businesses was, what billionaires should keep, what they shouldn't keep, and what government's supposed to do. So with that, hopefully this pandemic ends soon, whatever soon is. But this episode will be ending now. Thanks for listening. It's everybody from Policy War signing out. Thank you.
Y'all have a wonderful weekend.